Greetings, aviators. I'm Russ Still. In tonight's live broadcast, we'll follow along with a real private pilot candidate and a simulated private pilot oral exam. The student's name is Mike Hannam, and I can tell you that he's been feeling the stress that we've all felt when confronted with a check ride. No matter how well we're prepared, there's always some degree of anxiety involved in submitting ourselves to one of these things. Mike's instructor is Jeff Jorgenson of Knoxville, Iowa. Now, Jeff has been instructing for quite a few years, and he's one of the CFIs affiliated with Gold Seal. Now, he knows his stuff and has a 100% student pass rate on practical tests. Like many CFIs, Jeff has his own privately branded ground school program at skyweb.groundschool.com. If you're a CFI, you should check this out and see what he's done. Now, at Gold Seal, we work directly with instructors to deliver superior training to their students. We put them in the loop, and over 1,500 instructors are already Gold Seal members. Now, what this means is that instructors join our online ground school for free. They get full access to the entire program at no charge, but here's where it really gets good. Student monitoring is built right in. This allows instructors to work more closely with their students. If you're an instructor, Gold Seal is the only place you'll find this capability. And again, it's 100% free to you. Sign up is quick and easy at groundschool.com. So back to tonight. Our longtime friend Todd Shellnutt will be acting as the DPE in this oral exam. Todd was the AOPA 2015 Flight Instructor of the Year and has given hundreds of check rides at all levels. He's about as experienced as they come. So Todd, welcome back. We did one of these about a year ago and it's very popular, so we're going to do it again tonight.
Thanks, Russ. It's always great to be back with Gold Seal. I tell you, this is my passion, and I love doing it. Every time I think about participating and doing something like this, it just really puts a big smile on my face.
We really do have a lot of fun putting these webinars together, and you've done a few with us. Now, check rides are something that when you get a new candidate in there, they're always anxious and stressed. You usually spend a few minutes trying to calm them down a little bit, right?
I have to do that. That's part of the check ride process. I think everyone who goes into the check ride is just automatically has that sense of anxiety with them. So I do have to spend a good probably 15 or 20 minutes of that time just trying to do some coffee and donuts and just trying to get them into that spirit that, hey, it's just you and I talking. So try to relax as much as possible.
Make it out like two guys talking about aviation,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, your candidate tonight, his name is Mike Hannam. Now let's go ahead and start out and assume that you've already done the paperwork. You've looked over the log books for the airplane. You've looked over his 8710, all his endorsements and everything. So just for sake of time, we'll abbreviate it and let's just make it where we can jump right in. Now, one comment I'll make right now is we're streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and also on our own page, onlinegroundschool.com/live. If there's any of these sites that don't seem to be streaming or keeping up, just jump on over to onlinegroundschool.com/live, and we've got a private stream running there. So Todd, I'm going to turn this over to you, and then you can meet Mike, and you guys have at it, okay?
Okay, thanks.
Sounds good.
Hey, Mike, you with us?
I am.
Good deal. So like Russ said, we're going to assume that we've already looked over all the paperwork and that we're ready to go. That paperwork process with a DPE is sometimes can take a couple of minutes, and when I say a couple of minutes, it may take anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes depending on how well you've got it set up prior to coming into the check ride. So with that being said, since we've already understood that it's going to happen, we can go directly to our ACS. Now the ACS is short for Airman Certification Standards, and that's going to be literally our how-to guide of how to conduct this check ride. So I know we talked earlier and I asked for you to have your ACS out during the check ride. So we'll take our Airman Certification Standards and we'll just put that right up on the very first page. We'll let everybody at home see the Airman Certification Standards. We'll pop that right on the screen. And as we go into the very first page, look there, I probably should have already been on that page, but here we go. Area of Operation 1, Pre-Flight Preparation. And the very first thing we talk about is our pilot qualifications. Now, when we first talked about this check ride, one of the things that we do is that examiner would like to do is the examiner is going to give you a scenario. The scenario that I had given you was to create a flight plan from one airport to another airport, and you've done that. And we've also mapped out your route on a sectional chart for us. So today, our whole entire thing that we're going to do here between you and I is to talk about this scenario. Now, if you remember, when we talked about the scenario, we said that you are actually going to take one of your friends on a day trip down to this airport to have some lunch. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, so our entire scenario will focus around that. And we'll go down through the Airman Certification Standards. And what we can see through the ACS is there are three very distinct chapters of each task. And so the one of them is called our knowledge, and the other one's called risk management, and the last one is skills. So as the examiner, I have to pick one of the knowledge areas, I have to pick one of the risk management areas, and I have to pick all of the skill areas. So we'll start off by looking at the knowledge area, and I'll blend these questions in, or the scenarios, into your scenario, and we'll go from there. Do you have any questions before we begin?
Nope.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's get started. So the first one we're going to talk about is our scenario. You're flying with your friend. We've also established prior to starting here that you own your own aircraft. You own a Cessna 150, and that is actually a true statement. You actually really do own a Cessna 150. That's not a made-up thing here for our check ride, mock check ride tonight. And so a lot of the questions I'm going to be asked are going to be tailored towards you actually owning your airplane versus renting from a flight school or some other scenario. So we're going to stick with real-life things here to make it better for us. One of the things here that we're going to, when we start off here, is in this scenario, flying with your friend down to this particular area. You own your own airplane, and one of the things that we must be concerned with is, if we'll look at our ACS here, we can see that we have to be familiar with privileges and limitations. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about their privileges and limitations, but I won't specifically just ask you a question about it. I'll always pose these as a scenario. Sometimes I may ask you a question in regards to the privileges and limitations, but I'll immediately follow it with a scenario to make sure you totally understand exactly what I'm asking, and make sure you have that mastery of the elements, is what the FAA says that you should have as a private pilot in regards to the Airman Certification Standards for private pilot. So, your friend that you want to take with you on this flight today, he knows that you own your own airplane, and he knows that it costs money for the fuel, and your friend has said, hey, look, I really appreciate you taking me to lunch today, and it's your plane and your cost of the operation, and you're going to take me all the way down here. But you know, as your buddy, I'd like to be able to do you a big solid, and I'd like to be able to take care of the fuel bill today for today's flight. Now, can your friend do that?
No, he can only take care of his portion. So if it's just me and him going, he can do half of the fuel cost for the trip. But otherwise, that would be getting paid to take him on a flight, which is not allowed.
Okay, absolutely. And we have some more privileges and limitations that we could talk about. They're listed in the regulations, and it's a requirement for you to actually know those as a private pilot. So in regards to, that's a privilege, but or a limitation, can you tell me about some of the privileges that you would have as a private pilot?
So the privilege of, I would be able to take him with me. I need to look that up.
Okay. So these are one of those things that a DPE would do to you, or I should say an examiner would do to you in the check ride. They would kind of put you on the spot for something like that, but you actually did say a good answer, and that is, let me look that up. Now, we can take this all the way back to the student pilot phase, where it requires us to know about Part 61 and 91 applicable to that. So as a private pilot, you want to know what you can do and what you can't do. And you already knew what you couldn't do, which is fly for hire. And then you also told me that you had to do the pro rata share. Now, pro rata share is one of the privileges, so I'm going to give you that one. Let's go to the next question. Assuming that your logbook shows that you've only flown about once in the past 90 days, and it was just a local area flight by yourself around the local traffic pattern area at your home airport. Are you perfectly legal to take your friend today on this trip with you?
No, I'm not. I actually need to have 3 full stop, or I need to have 3 landings in the last 90 days. And if it's at night, they need to be full stop landings if any portion of our flight will take place at night with the passenger.
Okay. Well, we're hoping that none of this flight will take place at night, but we don't know how the check ride is going to go yet because the scenario is just an ever-changing scenario. And that's what's really cool about the Airman Certification Standards. No 2 check rides would actually be alike if the examiner was actually working this scenario like they're supposed to. So let's go into, that would take care of the one part of the risk management area. Let's talk a little bit more about that. That is actually a requirement referred to as currency. That's located within 61.57 of the regulations. But sometimes as a pilot, just because we're current doesn't necessarily mean we're safe. Tell me what you think this word proficiency means to you versus currency.
Well, just because I'm current, I could have 3 night landings, or I could have just 3 landings in the last 90 days. But if it's been 30 days, that's kind of a long time. And if I'm going to put somebody else's life at risk, I'm going to make sure that, that I have a good flight in the day before or within a reasonable amount of time if I haven't flown a lot.
Okay, very good. The last thing we're going to talk about here is going to be the skills, and it says here that we're apply the requirements to act as PIC under VFR in a scenario given by the evaluator. So the scenario is you get out to the aircraft and you're ready to go, and you tap your back of your pants pocket and you realize you've left your wallet at the house. And although with your logbook you have your pilot certificate and you have your medical and you have your logbook with you, you left your photo ID in your wallet, which is at the house. Tell me about how that would affect your flight today.
It means I got to go back to the house. I do have to have a valid government issued ID, accompanied with my private pilot certificate or student pilot certificate, whatever certificate I'm holding.
I agree.
So
now you have you realize you have your United States passport in your car. Would that work?
That would be a valid government issued ID.
I
Yes.
think it would work, absolutely. Sometimes an examiner may ask you a question, it sounds like they're kind of contradicting what they just said, so don't get caught up in that DPE trap, okay?
Sure.
Let's go down to the next one here. That's good. So Area of Operation 1, I've asked you some questions about that. According to the FAA, you've met the standards on those particular items. Let's move on to Area of Operation 1 Task B, which is airworthiness requirements. So we're going to be talking about your airplane that you own, your little 150, or your 150. And let's start off by simply talking about the general airworthiness requirements and compliance for airplanes. So the first question is, I know that there's some required paperwork that must be on board the plane prior to flight. So my first question is, could you tell me about that paperwork?
Yeah, so I need to have my POH. I need to have the airworthiness certificate, the registration. I feel like I'm missing a piece. And my logbooks.
Okay. Are you familiar with the chapters of the POH?
Not by number.
Okay. What about by content?
Sure.
Is there something in there that would help you figure out your center of gravity?
Weight and balance, yes.
Okay. Is that some of the paperwork you need?
Yes, I need my weight and balance chart.
Okay. So can't help you out too much more like that, and that would be the examiner almost borderline teaching in the check ride, so that's probably not going to happen. But that's me out there fishing and see what I can get from you. Luckily, I got a snag on that one, so that was pretty good. Two of these certificates have to be within plain view of the passengers when they get in the plane. Now, I know you said you just bought this plane about a year ago, so what are these two documents that must be within plain view of the passengers or anybody getting on board the plane?
The registration and the airworthiness certificate.
Okay. Now, how does that airworthiness certificate, how does it stay valid?
It's valid for the life of the aircraft as long as it is complied with. The ADs are complied with, and it is current on its inspections.
Okay, so the airworthiness certificate stays good if the airplane is airworthy, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in this scenario, you just bought a plane about a year ago. This is a realistic scenario. And when you bought that airplane, you had to change ownership just like we do a tag on a vehicle, on an automobile. And you had to fill out what paperwork? What is that called?
It was a bill of sale.
Yep. And then the accompanying the airworthiness certificate on the airplane is, what did you call that a minute ago?
The registration.
The registration. So when would you be required to do a new registration for your aircraft?
In 2 more years. The registration is good for 3 years.
Very good. So the registration is good for 3 years. And so that would take care of our knowledge area K1A, certificate location and expiration dates. Do you have an annual inspection coming up soon for your airplane?
I do actually. I need to drop the plane off next week for it.
Outstanding. And that's a good thing for me to know because that allows me to drive now this scenario into that way. So every time I figure out a different piece of information, it helps drive the scenario and the way I want to drive the scenario for the check ride. So let's talk about the required inspections and airplane logbook documentation. Let's see if we can drive the scenario down through that. So you don't get a chance, let's say that the weather changed for today and you weren't able to get the trip done today. Could you do it in 2 weeks or a week?
Provided that the annual inspection is completed and then it passes, once that's done and the aircraft's airworthy, weather permitting, we're ready to go.
Okay, so your mechanic is a brand new mechanic on the field, and your mechanic tells you after the annual inspection that he was only able to get half the annual done, and he'll come back in a couple of weeks and do the other half of the annual. Can you fly the airplane with half of an annual?
Not if it's expired. If my annual's expired, the plane's not moving until he is done with his inspection.
That is correct. However, that's been a scenario that's actually happened in the past with aircraft owners where they try to do the annual inspection and the aircraft owner flew it during the time before it was actually completed. So, realistic scenario for this check ride. When you get your airplane back from your maintenance person, what are you looking for in the logbooks?
I'm looking at the logbooks for what he's written. I'm going to want to see what he's done to it, that he signs off that it is airworthy. There's a line at the bottom, I believe, that he signs off on and does grant it airworthiness.
Okay. Very good. Where could you, as an aircraft owner, locate a complete list of airworthiness directives that would be applicable to your serial number of your Cessna 150?
FAA.gov.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Have you been there to the FAA.gov website and looked at some of those things?
I was actually on there just a few minutes ago.
Oh, great. Did you happen to look at anything called a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin?
Yes, there's actually one for my Cessna 150 that talks about the elevator bolts walkout. So
interesting. Very interesting. So, as an examiner, if I wanted to, I could actually delve into that and ask you more information about it as an aircraft owner to make sure you understood that, to ensure that when your mechanic done the work, that you understood the scope of actually what was to be done, to make sure that that you are familiar with it as the aircraft owner, as well as to make sure that that it was properly documented. And as the aircraft owner, who is responsible for ensuring that this maintenance is actually done on the aircraft?
I am. As the aircraft owner, it's my responsibility to make sure that that airplane is maintained and ready to go.
That's correct. And that's why, as an aircraft owner, it's very important for you to actually make sure that you have a little bit more working knowledge in regards to these special airworthiness information bulletins and airworthiness directives, because you're actually responsible for making sure those things are up and are taken care of. Let's say that the scenario's changed a little bit and you weren't able to get your airplane's annual inspection done. The mechanic just wasn't available. And now our annual inspection has actually expired. Now your airplane has become unairworthy. The mechanic that you usually take it to on your field is no longer there. He's on vacation and you want to get this thing done. You found a mechanic that is at another airport that is very close to where you live, and you want to fly your airplane over there to have the annual inspection done. Can you fly your aircraft over to that airport to have that inspection completed over there?
Well, if I first contact my local FSDO and get a ferry permit, then I can.
Very good. Outstanding. That's a good answer for that. So the ferry permit is used to basically go outside of the rules that the FAA would normally dictate, and you could go do something that would normally not be legal for an unairworthy airplane, and that would allow you to ferry that airplane from one place to another. Very good. Let's look at the risk management for this during flight. I would like to be able, let's look at your route. Can we get the route shown here for the viewers, please? I'm looking at your route on your cross country, and it looks as if on your route, okay. All right. Okay, so if we're looking at the route, thank you very much. If we're looking at the route, what we can see is that I actually want to see the sectional chart. Can we see the sectional chart on the big screen? I'm looking at the airspace that you're flying through. Now, if we're looking at the airspace that you're flying through, when you go out and did your pre-flight inspection, you noticed that your transponder was inoperative. Do you need a transponder for this route today?
No, I do not.
And can you tell me why?
Because I won't enter the controlled airspace that requires the Mode C transponder.
Okay, very good. So in regards to that question, you noticed that the transponder is inoperative, and there are some legal requirements for that. If you notice that this transponder is inoperative prior to the flight, what are some risk management items that you as the pilot must be familiar with in regards to knowing that that transponder is not going to work on today's flight?
I need to know that if something were to go wrong and I needed somebody to come find me, that's going to be impossible. Or it's going to make their job a lot harder. They're not going to be able to just look up and see where I'm at. If I have to divert for some reason and end up through controlled airspace, I'm not going to have that Mode C transponder, so I'm going to have to. It's going to limit my options.
Very good, and it would absolutely, when you're out there flying along, we like to use a little service that we call basic radar service. I think we have a nickname for it. What's the nickname for that when we have
flight following?
Flight following, and flight following likes to be able to see your transponder, so that actually works pretty good. We've already talked about on the skills side here where your airworthiness and registration are located within inside of the aircraft, so we can skip past that one. Your airplane's transponder being inoperative, would that make your airplane unairworthy?
It would until I had fixed a placard or marked it as inoperative per 91.213.
Well, I'm going to tell you, you're a man after my heart because I consider myself a regulations connoisseur, and when you spout off those reg numbers, that really has some extra bonus points with me as an examiner because I like to hear that you know about the legal side of the FAA's what they can do and what they cannot do. Remember, Part 61 is all the ways you can get your certificate, and Part 91 is all the ways the FAA can take it away from you. Let's look at the last question here, which is applying the appropriate procedures for operating with an inoperative equipment in scenario given by the examiner. And you've already done that as well because you've talked about the ferry permit, you've talked about the 91.213, so you've satisfied all those requirements. I think it's time we move on to the next area of operation. So let's go up to area of operation 1, task C, so the next task, not area of operation. And let's look at some weather information here that we have. Now, one of the things that we wanted to look at was the nav plan, the nav log that you did. So if we were to look at your nav log, let's pull the nav log up for the viewers to see. And we see here that you have some information written across the top of your nav log. So would this be the nav log that you actually brought into a check ride?
No, I'd probably clean that up.
Okay. What information should you have up there? When is this information from? When did you write that up there?
I wrote that up there while I was doing my flight planning.
Okay. So remember, when you come to a check ride, you have to make sure that the information that you have on your nav log is current information, as if you were truly going to go on this ride. In actuality, you are, but you're just not going to fly the whole entire route. So it's very important that your weather data be accurate and be current for the flight that we're going to do. So that would be something that if I was looking at as an examiner, I would want to look at that information and I want to see that information to be actually current. It's very hard for me to examine when I'm looking at data that is old. Okay? So that would be a hit, if you would, or not a good item in the check ride. Nonetheless, let's continue with this and see exactly what we're going to look at here today. So we have task C, weather information. And the first thing we have is probably one of my big pet peeves here as far as an examiner goes, and that is acceptable sources of weather data for flight planning purposes. And the key thing there is acceptable sources of weather data. So with that being said, can you tell me, how do you get your weather data?
I get my weather data through ForeFlight and Weather Brief, 1-800-WX Weather Brief, and I use ForeFlight to keep current while I fly. And
Okay.
I check, use ASOS or AWOS as I get enter airspaces.
Okay. When you use ForeFlight to get your data, what are you looking at on ForeFlight?
I'm looking at the ForeFlight or the forecasts for the area, wind speeds, that kind of thing.
Okay. When you are looking at your data in ForeFlight, do you do your nav log in ForeFlight? Do you put your where you're going and your waypoints along there?
Sometimes it depends. Sometimes I do.
Okay. So when you put that nav log into ForeFlight, do you ever click on that little button that says file and brief or brief?
I never have, no.
Okay. It's a good thing to do that. The reason for is because you want to have a record of you actually getting that weather briefing. So if you use ForeFlight holistically, you want to make sure you always click on the brief button. That way it's on record. So you also said that you did that you called 1-800-WX Brief. Is that correct?
I did, and I gave them my tail number.
Very good. Now, when you call them, do you file a flight plan when you talk to them?
Yes.
Okay. So tell me, while we're on that subject right there, how would you, when you're coming out of your airport, how would you open your flight plan?
So I can either call them before I take off, or I can do it from the radio and radio in to start my flight plan.
Okay. All right. Who would you radio into?
Flight service.
Flight service. Okay.
I'd
Very
have to
good.
look up the frequency.
Good. And we'll actually talk about that in a minute, where to find the frequency. So stand by for that question. That's coming up. So that's acceptable sources of weather data for flight planning purposes. That answers that question. I need to know like some legit services that you're getting them from, and 1-800-WX-BRIEF is about as legit as you can get, because that's the FAA's official contractor who provides that. Let's scroll down just a little bit to the risk management portion. We're actually going to come back up to the knowledge portion here in just a minute, and you'll see why when we get down to the bottom of the page. But on the risk management side, let's talk just with the risk management area 1. And we're going to talk about factors involved in making that go, no-go decision that you would have. So you depart on your flight, and as you are flying to your destination, you see that there's like a big black cloud, and it appears to be moving over your flight path. Now, when you were training, your instructor told you to stay how many nautical miles away from what may appear to be a thunderstorm?
20 nautical miles.
20 nautical miles, okay. Sometimes I think pilots like to cut a little close. Sometimes they don't know what 20 nautical miles may look like from a thunderstorm. But let's just say, for instance, that it looked like this thunderstorm, or this big black cloud that was raining, is moving right across your path, and it's actually blocking your flight path. What could you do as a pilot at that time? What kind of risk management?
I can turn around and go back. I can pick a different place to land and try and wait it out. But if it's a large storm, I'm probably going to turn around and go back.
Okay. And that is an absolute good idea. That is one option that you would have. The good thing about aeronautical decision making and risk management, it is very dynamic, and it changes a lot. So the diversion is something that we always have to have on the table as a pilot. It's a tool, a very useful tool for increasing safety. Now, looking at this flight that we're going to do today, and knowing that this weather system was out there, this cloud system that was out there, it seems like to me that we don't want to be just taking off and just going out there and just playing it by ear all the time. And that a pilot should probably have some way that they can mitigate that risk with them. So in regards to personal weather minimums, is there any type of tool that you could use to help you mitigate those risks?
As far as the weather?
As far as everything.
As far as everything, the PAVE checklist would be an excellent way to do that.
Very good. You're saying all the right answers. This is really, really good. I like the answers that you're giving me. The PAVE checklist is a wonderful checklist that you could use to be able to do that. Can you talk about, well, actually, I tell you what, let's just keep with this scenario, and you got me excited with answering these questions so well, sir. I'm going to tell you, you're going to do very well on your check ride. Let's continue on with the risk management things, and we'll double back to the letter B there on the risk management, risk 1B. We'll double back to that by going to the skills portion. As you can see here, it says use available aviation weather sources and obtain an adequate weather briefing and correlate weather information to make a competent go, no-go decision. Now, at this time in the check ride is where we would actually bring up the actual weather along your route. And when we bring this weather up, I would look at the METAR and the TAF, maybe the graphical area forecast, because it doesn't look like there's a lot of tafts along your route. And I would use that to go over that weather data in real time. We are going to bypass that, and I'm going to ask you very specific questions in regards to weather, but we're just not going to look at the current forecast that we have. And the reason for is because if we were in the Checkride and you brought in the nav log and we had that data across the top and we're dealing with outdated weather, I would just simply have to pull the weather reports up live and go from there. So let's go to the next one, Skills 2, and see what that has. And we may actually double back to the weather and see what we can look at there. So it says, discuss the implications of at least 3 of the conditions listed in 3A through 3K above using actual weather or weather conditions in a scenario provided by the examiner. So if I go back up and I'm looking at 3A through 3K, I'm going to have to pick a couple of these to close out that scenario. So we've already talked about having this thunderstorm that would be in your area, and you've already told me about the way that you stay 20 nautical miles away from the thunderstorm. But if you were looking at weather reports and you were trying to look at a weather report and figure out if a thunderstorm was actually a probability for your area, what type of weather would you be looking at? What are the things that actually make up the formation of a thunderstorm?
I'd be looking at the dew point, the winds, and I'd be looking at the map, looking at the radar map for the surrounding area.
All right. So it is fair game for an examiner to, instead of actually looking at a chart, just to ask you what, like textbook definitions, things like what are the 3 things that make up a thunderstorm? That's your high moisture content, your lifting action, and an unstable atmosphere. So if we're looking at these particular things here, examiner was in their fair scope to ask you very specific questions about weather, like which way high pressure rotates, which way low pressure rotates. So on that thunderstorm thing, you probably want to do a little bit more research, and not just how a thunderstorm looks on a radar chart, but the things that would make it up and the different charts that would show you how stable the atmosphere is. As you're along your route, you do get a little bit closer than 20 miles. You get actually pretty close, 5 to 7 miles. And you get into a little bit of rain. It's not really that bad at first, but then you feel the airplane getting pushed down very hard. And it's almost like the airplane's going down and you're pulling back on the yoke and increasing your angle of attack. What could this possibly be?
That's wind shear.
Okay. What is the definition of wind shear? What is wind shear?
Wind shear is a downward force, a downward wind. Just shoves down on the airplane.
Okay.
Very, very dangerous in a light aircraft.
Okay. So as the examiner, I would start digging. So now you've created a little rabbit hole for me, and I could start digging at this particular juncture. And by way of that, I'm looking for you to say a certain thing. And what I'm looking for you to talk about microburst. But we went into wind shear. Now, wind shear is just a sudden change of the winds. So it's a change of winds, a shearing against one another. So what I was looking at for you to talk about was microburst, because I was specifically talking about thunderstorms, and I wanted you to start talking about microburst, those things that are pushing you down 6,000 foot a minute, pushing you down towards the ground, and that's what I want to talk about. So the examiner can get into and have you create these rabbit holes for yourself, and then I can run down that rabbit hole and see what you know. And if I wanted to, I could just run down through that wind shear, because you gave me the wrong definition for wind shear, and I could run down that rabbit hole, which I'm not, due to time constraints. So let's talk about something else then. We know that we have some thunderstorms. We can probably see those along our route. We know that microbursts are a byproduct of that, but we also know that there's some other byproducts of that thunderstorm. So if we were looking at our list here, we can see that there's a lot of these lists here within the ACS, which some things that may come through thunderstorms. But specifically, I want to talk about the turbulence. How can you, using the weather forecast, know where there may be some turbulence present along your route? What are some forecasts you could look at?
PIREPs would be where I would go for that.
Okay, I agree with you that PIREP could definitely be one of those things that that are an issue. Let's do this right here. Let's go live here to aviationweather.gov, and I want to pull up some reports here and have you look at them. And give me the airport identifier for your home airport again.
OXV, KOXV.
KOXV, X-ray.
Knoxville.
Yeah, there you go. All right, and let's bring this up on the big screen and let's see what we have here on this. Let's see, go. Let me make sure I put in the wrong thing here. Yeah, I'm an old guy, so I have to put my spectacles on before I make a spectacle of myself. And it's Oscar X-ray Victor, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. For some reason, I'm not getting anything up on that. And it's Oscar X-ray Victor.
Yep.
I wonder why it's not bringing
Kilo,
anything
Oscar,
up.
X-ray, Victor.
Yeah, I don't see anything coming up on that. Again, what's another airport that's close to you?
Another airport would be Ottumwa, OTM, Oscar, Tango, Mike.
Okay. All right, I see that one come up. I didn't see the other one come up for some reason. All right, so we see that we have some weather here that we're looking at for the National Weather Service here. No apologies to be made here, but I just want to make sure that we get to the right thing here. Let's bring this up again and go for the METAR. Oh, here we go. This is actually what I was looking for here. Oscar X-ray Victor. All right, so now we have this up on the screen, and we can see here. Can you see what I have?
Yeah. Can you move it right?
You may move it to the right?
Yep, just a little other way.
Other way. My other right. My military right.
Yeah, my right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So as an examiner, I would just ask you to read that for me. So if you would, tell me what the weather is.
On the 27th day of the month at midnight, 35 minutes Zulu, automated weather. Wind is 140 degrees at 7 knots, 10 statute miles of visibility, few clouds at 12,000 feet, 17 degrees Celsius, and 11 degrees is the dew point. And I'd set the altimeter to 29.83.
Okay, very good. And probably I think the biggest flaw that we have on this with checkrides is people getting out of touch with reading raw data. It's within the examiner's scope of the checkride to show raw data and not show decoded data. So just make sure that you don't get too caught up in having the decoded data versus that data. Do you know the closest airport to you that has a TAF?
I don't.
Okay.
KDSM's close. They should have everything.
Give me that identifier one more time.
Yeah, Delta Sierra Mike.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now we have a TAF here, And we're just going to assume that this TAF relates to, I got it over to the right. You should be able to see it clearly. Is that correct?
Yeah, I get about half of it there.
Okay. So I'm just going to look at a time here that we would do that. Can you see it now?
Yeah. Can you
Okay.
go? Keep going. Keep going a little more. Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So let's assume that our departure time was around, just for the sake of this, was around 2100 Zulu.
Okay.
Tell me about the weather that you would probably have around 2100 Zulu.
That would be more than 6 statute miles, overcast at 15,000 feet.
Okay. So that would be around 1900, right?
Yeah. Well, it'd be night. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. What is the weather going to be at 2200?
At 2200, the visibility is going to come down just a little bit and go to 26 statute miles. Showers, rain, broken clouds at 4,500 feet.
Okay. So start from the 6 statute miles and read that again for me, just to make sure I heard you correctly.
6 statute miles, rain showers, mist, and broken clouds at 4,500 feet.
Very good. When you say wrong things on a check ride, I like personally just to ask you to repeat it. Sometimes on a check ride that may be a sign for you to kind of rethink what you did. You did give me one piece of incorrect information. However, if we were actually in the exam and I was giving this exam, I would not say anything. I would let you just continue to read because I don't want your anxiety levels to go higher. So if we go back to that 1900 mark, what you had said was greater than 6 statute miles, overcast at 15,000.
1,500.
It's 1,500. And again, that's just one of those things where if the examiner hears it, you can create a rabbit hole. And I'm like, really? Let's pull up some other charts and have you read those. And I'm just going to have you read them until I'm convinced that you're actually do know how to read the non-decoded TAF. Okay? I think a lot of people nowadays are actually so used to seeing decoded stuff because of the technology that we have. But just to understand on the check ride that things actually written in the raw data, the raw code, is the preferred way for the examiner to actually conduct the check ride. Okay, let's go back over to the ACS and let's look and see where we are in the ACS. It says hazardous weather conditions to include known or forecast icing. So what type of weather reports would we go to look at to see if there was icing along our route?
We would go to METARs and PIREPs.
Now, would a METAR show you if there was icing up at 4,000 feet?
No, not at 4,000 feet, but it would tell us the temperature and the dew point.
Okay. Probably not the best report to look at when you're looking at icing aloft.
Okay.
There's some pretty good reports for us to look at in regards to icing aloft. So if you are looking at some of your weather reports, either at 1-800-WXBrief.com or some other one, what are some reports that literally spearhead that conversation in regards to icing?
AirMets and SIGMET. AirMets and SIGMETs.
Very good. AirMets and SIGMETs both deal with forecasts for icing. That's very good. And then you did say the last one, which is the most reliable, which is PIREPs, because it's a live report, not something that is actually a forecast. It's a live report. It is fair game for the examiner to bring out an AirMet and ask you to read an AirMet in raw form, not decoded. So you want to make sure that you keep that very close to yourself. So with that, we went back to the weather report And we went back to skills 1, which is using available aviation weather sources, obtain an adequate weather briefing, and correlate weather information to make a competent go, no-go decision. So based off what you've seen just in the TAF, assuming that we're actually going to leave at that time period, what I brought up there, is this a flight that you would do based off just seeing the METAR and the TAF just for your departure airport?
No.
Okay. With the hypothetical being that the TAF was actually within the area of your departure airport.
Sure. Yep.
And
No,
tell me why you would not do that.
The 1,500 feet was, it's too low for me. It's beyond my personal minimums. And there were thunderstorms, or there was more weather coming.
Okay. Very good. So you saw that trend there, right?
Yes.
Very good. And so that's how we could get started on some of that weather stuff. This is one of the areas that the examiner could spend a large amount of time on this chapter, on this task. I just try to give a strong sampling tonight of this. The reason for it is we're just kind of a time constraint and with this live broadcast that we have. So with that being said, let's move on past weather into the next one, and let's see if we can take a sampling from the next one. We're on to our cross-country flight planning task now. And one of the things that we are going to look at here is, again, it is within my full authority as the examiner to test you on whatever I want to test you on, as long as I'm testing on the master of the elements. So K1 through K5 here, I'm going to ask you specifically about, I'm going to take the easy side of this, and I'm going to ask you about the elements of a VFR flight plan. Actually, let's talk about the procedures for activating and closing a VFR flight plan. Have we already talked about that?
We touched on it with...
I think we touched on it. So as you can see, there are some portions of the check ride that can actually overlap, and you can kind of double dip in some of these things, or just ask a question once and get credit for it in another task. Normally, if an examiner sees something they've already asked on, they're probably going to ask you something else in regards to that. So, because I've already done that, and that was a pretty easy thing, I'd already talked about it on a previous one, I'm actually going to go back to K2. Now, K2 says altitude selection accounting for terrain and obstacles, glide distance of the airplane, VFR cruising altitudes, and effective wind. But we're just going to take this one bite at a time. Let's say, for instance, that in your flight planning that you did, that you didn't want to get up into the 3,500 and 4,500 foot range after looking at the weather due to some PIREPs that you heard about, some turbulence there. So looking at your aeronautical chart that you're going to use for your cross-country flight planning, what would be the lowest altitude that you could be at on your route, on your initial segment of your route, the lowest segment that would be safe from all obstacles?
1,600 feet.
Now, I'm looking at your chart here, and I see your first checkpoint there, which is the town of, is it pronounced Busy?
Bussy?
Bussy? Okay, fine. Looking at your chart a minute ago, I looked like it only said B-U-S-Y. That's the reason why I was asking. And then I have another checkpoint down here. Is that Eddyville?
Yeah, Eddyville is down there.
Okay, very good. So tell me on your chart there, why would you say 1,600?
Where it's circled there, that 1.6, it tells me that there's obstacles to about 1,500 feet.
Okay, good. And where do you see these numbers like that? Do they appear all over the chart, or just in one spot, or where?
Well, they're kind of sparse throughout at different elevations.
Okay. So if we were looking at let's look at the whole entire route. Bring up the whole entire route. And let's look and see if there's a different figure besides 1,600 on there.
There is 1,700 and 1,800.
Okay, so just to be on the safe side, instead of going and climbing and descending all the time, what's the lowest altitude you'd probably choose for that route?
1,900.
Okay, I like that. That's fine. You're giving yourself a little buffer there. So I see that you're going one part of this route, you're going east, and another part of it, you're going west. Talk to me about the VFR cruising altitudes for your cross-country planning.
It is above 3,500 feet AGL, evens and odds. So evens to the west and the south, and odds to the north and the east, plus 500 feet because we are VFR.
Okay. Now you said above 3,500 foot AGL. What did you mean by that?
So below 3,500 feet AGL, the separation is not required, or the distinct altitudes are not required, but it is recommended. It's a nice spot to be so that you know what's around you.
I think if you look that up in the regs, I think you're going to see that's 3,000 feet.
3,000 feet.
Yeah, 3,000 feet. But you're higher, which makes you safer, but it's still something that the examiner would ask you about. Hey, where did you see that? Well, show me where you say that. I don't understand where you saw that at. So that answers that question for altitude selection and accounting for terrain and obstacles. I also see here that there's a question, it wants me to talk to you about glide distance of the airplane. So at that particular point, I would start asking you questions like, well, do you think that 1,900 is a safe altitude?
1,900, I think 1,900 is a safe altitude for the terrain in the area. There's plenty of places to put it down if I had to put it down on engine out. I would like some more altitude than that for scenarios where I lose thrust and need to try to restart the airplane or work my way through my checklist for different problems.
I agree. I agree with you there. And I personally, from a personal standpoint, I'm always going to try to get the highest I could possibly get. It's cooler temperatures, and there's three things in aviation you can never get back: the runway behind you, the fuel in the truck, and the altitude above you. And that's an important thing to remember. The effective wind. So what is another good reason for choosing an altitude?
For the wind. Actually on this trip, I ended up with a better tailwind at 3,000 feet. So it carried me through, used less fuel, allowed me to use less power out of the airplane and make decent time.
Good. So you can kind of see that if we're asking you just specific questions on this ACS and you see the examiner going on a certain route, if you had the ACS out in front of you, you could probably almost see where they're going to go with the questions as you're peering right along, because we're just covering the information as it's depicted in the ACS. If we're going down to the risk management side of this, and we're looking at we talked about risk earlier. You mentioned something called the PAVE checklist, which I thought was phenomenal. And we talked about mitigating risk, but if you're the person that is acting PIC and you're the PIC for this flight, what is a good checklist for you, for yourself to have?
There's a checklist, I am safe. So it's illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and emotion.
Okay. Very good. So the I'm Safe checklist, I think a lot of people are very familiar with the I'm Safe checklist. So the scenario is you started to feel bad yesterday. You had a little bit of sinus something. You weren't really feeling 100%. So you stopped by your local drugstore. You picked up a packet of Sudafed, and you took a dose of it yesterday. You took a dose this morning, and you want to probably take another dose before you go flying because you just weren't feeling good. Is that something that you can do as a pilot? Can you just go by the drugstore and just grab some medication off the shelf and take it?
It's definitely something that I want to be leery about because different medications affect you differently. I visit the AOPA website and look for approved medications that I can take. or if it's something that I've taken, if it's something that prevents me from flying, then I'm going to postpone that flight.
That is the most appropriate answer. It's a very good. A lot of people like to say the FAA website, which is, I understand why they're saying it, but AOPA's website is probably the better one due to the fact that it's searchable and it gives a lot more pertinent data on it. So if you didn't have access to the internet, what's another way that you could probably, what's another resource you have at your fingertips for asking about medications that you could actually take and go flying?
I could probably call 1-800-weather brief and ask somebody
They don't
there
know anything. They just know about weather.
then at my fingertips. Oh, I've got a book. I've got a big book. Tells me about my FAR aim book. It's telling me.
No, that wouldn't help you.
idea.
But you're on the right track. You could call somebody who knows about medicine.
Oh, call my AME.
You could probably call your AME. That's a good person to call. Always be on a good relationship with your AME because he can help you answer a lot of questions. He or she can help you answer a lot of questions in regards to that. Very good. We're kind of getting down to the nitty gritty inside of the broadcast here, and we've already talked about some of the skills portions here. We talked about navigation plan and simulate following a VFR flight plan. For that particular instance, what I would want you to do is I would literally say, show me how you're going to do it. I think you told me that a minute ago, but if you were using ForeFlight, I think you said you used to do a lot of your flight planning. How do you file the flight plan?
You click the file button.
You just click the button. It's pretty simple. In regards to, I think what we talked about a minute ago was actually making a phone call or I know we said open and close is actually what I asked. But filing it, if you're using the electronic means, you just simply click the button. And with aviation, with the 1-800-WX brief, you can actually do a text messaging service as well. So that's something that you also want to consider. Let's talk just a little bit. Let's see the flight plan here, I think. Yep, thank you very much. Let's look at the nav log. I'm sorry, the nav log. All right, if you would, sir, what I'd like for you to do, I see that and you can see why I was saying busy, because it looks B-U-S-Y.
I spelled it wrong.
That's no worries. I want you to talk to me about that first line there from Knoxville to Bussy, and just tell me the numbers that you have across there and how you got each one of those numbers. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so course route. So I use my my ruler on the chart. I got the wind.
So it's very common that the examiner would just have this information out in front of you.
Sure.
And you have all the weather data out in front of you, and the examiner would just say, show me how you got this. A lot of examiners are not interested in how a person did it on ForeFlight or other electronic means, and they'll just say, show me how you did it.
Sure.
So don't get too hung up on flight planning by the two-finger flight planning method. You know, the long press and then take your fingers off and boom, flight planning done. This is the nitty-gritty stuff that it takes for the private pilot to know. So with you kind of balking at some of this, I would be more in tune to spend a lot of time on this in regards to the numbers. I'm also looking at some of the other things too, like your distance. I see that there's nothing written in for your distance there. A lot of the things, the departure codes are not on there as well. I would be picking this thing apart pretty heavily. This is a tool that we use in flight to make sure that we can actually get to our destination and the time is correct and the fuel is correct. And so without these items being on there and the data being from another day, it would actually be a little bit more difficult for me to use in the check ride. So I would definitely, before your check ride, I would get really good at doing these, and then you could actually have it completely, almost completely done, 90% done, and then the day of your check ride, just drop in the weather, use your electronic E6B, and write all the data in that you actually need to have when you're doing the navlog. But you could take the same navlog on the day of your check ride and just transfer all the data over to it minus the weather, and you literally have 90% of your workload done. Okay? All right. Just about a minute here left that we can do. Let's see what else I can ask you in regards to this. So apply pertinent information from an appropriate and current aeronautical chart. So this is where I would bring out your chart supplement, and I would bring out your aeronautical charts, and I would ask you very specific questions about your route, and then I would start asking you very specific questions in regards to your airport facility directory is the old name. We call it a chart supplement nowadays. So do you have your chart supplement out for this airport that you're going to?
I do.
Okay. So it seems like your route, your time has actually gone a little bit longer than what you've actually expected. And you didn't ask the guy to refuel the airplane before you left. What would be the latest time that guy could probably fuel your airplane that night?
It'd be 9 p.m.
Okay, and why would you say that?
The hours of operation are 8 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Okay, very good. And you found that information from your chart supplement there for the airport that you're going to. Apologize for not having that up, but if you were following along with us at the airport that he's going to, you can see, give us that airport identifier one more time.
It is OTM, KOTM, Oscar Tango Mike.
That's right. So if you're looking at Oscar Tango Mike excerpt from the chart supplement, you could actually see there that the FBO closes at that particular time at night, and that's where he's reading that data from. All right. Well, at this particular time, we have really kind of come to an end on this time for our event tonight, and I'm going to turn it back over to Russ, and Russ is going to close us out.
Okay, good job, Mike. Todd gave you a pretty good run through, but I think you did a good job. Probably found some areas that you can work on some more, and that's why doing these things in advance is good for you, and it's also good for everybody else out here who's watching too, because a lot of them are in the same boat. So from a synopsis, how do you think Mike did overall?
So there was some, I'll tell you, from an examiner standpoint, when we go to the check ride and I start to examine people, there's only one set of standards, Russ, and the set of standards are the airman certification standards or the practical test standards. And in essence, what I can tell that student before the check ride starts is, look, all I'm looking for is a strong D-, okay? I want you to be above that, but that's the standards. So if you're just meeting the standards at every single question, there's only so much of a D- that the examiner will take over a period of time. So what I did see throughout his exam is he had a lot of good A+ points on there. Regulations, knowing the regs, that is awesome stuff. He was at my heart with the PAVE checklist, and he knew a lot of those things. But there were some other things too that I was really worried about, like his navlog and some other information in regards to weather. I wasn't too impressed in that. I would probably want to see those again.
Okay, well, good deal. I think that's a pretty good summary. So, Mike, thanks for joining us. And tell Jeff, your instructor, Would you tell Jeff, your instructor, that we're glad we get you hooked up? So I think you have your check ride coming up pretty soon. Todd gave you some good points to work on. And everybody else out there, I really hope you found this to be a useful thing. We did one of these about a year ago, and it was very, very popular. That's why we decided to do it again. We're probably going to do some more of these, so make sure you stay in touch with us here at Gold Seal. So I think we're probably about done for the evening. So thanks everyone for joining us. Fly smart and show everyone that you're a Gold Seal pilot.
Pass your written test and your check ride with Gold Seal, the Internet's #1 ground school. Take a free test drive today and see how much fun learning to fly can be at onlinegroundschool.com.